Joins us now, Matt Fortuna. Matt, congratulations. I just signed up, like as we were playing the open of the show, for the Inside Zone. You are one of our favorite college football writers, and congratulations on the new venture.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for subscribing. And yeah, it's been a blast. It's definitely different. And I'm grateful for all the time I had at the quote unquote, legacy mainstream media at ESPN and The Athletic, but it's been very exciting going at it at my own.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Matt, let's jump right into kind of what's going on this week in college football, which, I guess thankfully for us in the media, never a dull moment, although it would be nice for a dull moment. House versus NCAA looks like it's going to get hopefully settled, because then that moves on to the next thing. So with this should come what I think is maybe the NCAA's, trip to the moon moment, where they are forced into figuring out things that are new because they have to. Do you think this is overall good news for college sports that this lawsuit will get settled?
I think so. I think it's, obviously it's a bill past due, right? I mean, we've gone through this situation, I feel like, for over a decade now, where it's one lawsuit after another. We've seen the NCAA stub its toe time and time again. They were steadfast in their refusal to acknowledge that amateurism was, let's face it, a sham, at least in the eyes of the courts. And look, it was $1 billion business that didn't pay its labor and didn't pay taxes. So, what's the old saying? Pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered, I believe. I mean, it's not boding too well for the NCAA right now. And when you look at the kind of overcompensation on the other side of things, where we have essentially year-round free agency in college football, right? We have players entering the portal, committing to one school, then leaving before they even play a game for that school for another school. I know the phrase "Wild Wild West" gets thrown out there a lot, but that is what it is right now. And I hate the word guardrails, but there needs to be some kind of declaration here, right? Whether that's employer-employee, whether that's some special antitrust exemption for student athletes, players, where they have obligations to their schools and to whomever they're working for. It's definitely a strange time right now. I don't think anyone has a direct answer right now. But again, I think if you looked into the crystal ball a few years ago, if you didn't have your blinders on, if you weren't the NCAA, you could have seen a day like this coming, and they're just completely unprepared for it.
Yeah, and even with this settlement, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a knife wound, really. Like, it stops some of the bleeding, but it doesn't prevent it entirely. It doesn't prevent it from opening back up again because of just some of the loopholes in this agreement and the legal challenges that could still be there, Matt. So it's obviously a time, like you said, that's very interesting with these various lawsuits. There's the constant talk about, separation, which one could argue it's already happened just financially. There's already a Super 2 money-wise. But when you talk to folks around college athletics right now, what is kind of the overwhelming sentiment of where people think we're heading and where everybody is kind of at the table? Or is this a situation where there's a lot of people scared they're not going to be at tables they're accustomed to here moving forward? Which is kind of the overall sentiment you get around the athletic ranks?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of anxiety, right? I wouldn't go so far as to say everyone's unhappy, but everyone's definitely concerned. I mean, you have the Big Ten and SEC, which feel like they're doing all the heavy lifting. They make the most money. Why do they got to share this with everyone else? And they're looking to, pad their coffers, so to speak, and make sure that they're in financial shape to pay the settlement, these back payments. You have the ACC and the Big 12, the other power conferences that are not happy with the revenue gaps in TV money from the Big Ten, SEC, and everyone else, and with the way the Big Ten and the SEC are essentially holding them hostage with the new college football playoff format. And then you have the group of five, which it was always playing from behind and does at least have a way to play its way into the field and potentially a championship, as unlikely as that sounds. But they're worried about, the financial gaps being what it is. That there's talk, at least among some group of five schools, of do we start our own playoff? It's a very chaotic time in college football right now. And I'm not sure anyone has a clear answer. I do wonder, when you look into the future, when you look into 12 team or more playoff fields, I think strength of schedule is going to be valued even more than it has in the past. And I do wonder, if you're a Power 4 school, at what point do you stop scheduling Group of 5 programs? I think there are Group of 5 programs that have some anxiety about that. Are they going to be completely boxed out from that standpoint? Not unlike March Madness in some cases, right? I mean, we see mid-majors kind of get the short end of the stick when it comes to Selection Sunday, and there's really no recourse for them to play their way into the field because no one good or no one who can afford to play them wants to play them.
Matt, the ACC is meeting now in Amelia Island at the Ritz-Carlton, which is lovely. I'm sure they're having a great time.
It is. I've been there.
It's lovely. Although, and they keep saying all the things that they should say about, it's not weird, the Florida State and Clemson, and now North Carolina's got factions that are popping up that are sound almost like they took Florida State's board meeting from a year ago and just did a search and replace for North Carolina. How can they proceed knowing that you've got two now very loud members of your conference that are leaving? That's what they're going to do. They're going to leave. They're not going to stay. They're not doing this because they want to renegotiate and reform the ACC. They're leaving. How do they really navigate this?
It's a weird time because it's not like the Big Ten and the SEC are banging down the doors in Tallahassee or Death Valley right now trying to add these two schools. Now, if and when they do become free agents, I suppose that is definitely a possibility. But it's not like there's an exit plan, so to speak. It's just, let's get out of this deal and see what happens. And I don't know what the next steps are. It certainly seems like you can't put that toothpaste back in the bottle, so to speak. I imagine these lawsuits will eventually be settled. They'll come up with a number. It's just hard to see a situation where, all these schools all these athletic directors and presidents are in league meetings together behind closed doors singing Kumbaya ever again, right? It's hard to see that, especially with, as you mentioned, the chaos in North Carolina that came out this week. And reading the tea leaves throughout the course of the last couple of months, it certainly seemed like there was some disconnect there as far as how they feel privately versus how they feel they should approach this thing publicly. And I think seeing Clemson follow Florida State's lawsuit and steps is kind of the trigger where they're looking at this thinking to themselves, what are we doing? What should we be doing? Because to be honest with you, I would venture to guess that North Carolina is the most desired property from a brand standpoint among the ACC schools, not including Notre Dame. If they were all free agents tomorrow, I think North Carolina, it's in the biggest state or market that is not in Big Ten or SEC territory right now. And I think culturally they could fit in with either conference. And that's a blue blood brand. That's a brand that has its own color, Carolina blue. I mean, I think both conferences would be very intrigued by adding North Carolina. And let's face it, they wouldn't feel any pushback from South Carolina or from Florida the way the SEC would, because they already have, footholds in those states. So Carolina's going to be very interesting to follow here. Bubba Cunningham's one of the most widely respected athletic directors in the country. Obviously not the best of weeks from him, just based on the discourse coming out of Chapel Hill with some of those trustees. It didn't sound like he said a whole lot publicly coming out of Amelia Island. Jim Phillips, ACC commissioner, from what I read from the reports down there, kind of punted on the issue and said, like, that's a campus issue. They need to resolve that themselves. But it certainly feels like this is the first next step of, okay, we're not happy. What are we going to do about it? We've already seen two other schools in our conference take the legal route. Are we going to do that next?
Matt, you brought up the Irish, and they're always an interesting chess piece in all the realignment, speculation or reporting or whatever it may be at the time. There's a lot of folks that believe eventually they're going to get squeezed into having to make a choice about joining the conference. There are plenty of Irish folks and non-Notre Dame people that say, we'll see. That we don't believe that'll ever happen. What do you think about Notre Dame, just based on the information that you have? And obviously nothing imminent. They just signed a new TV deal, but do you think that Notre Dame, even with the brand that they are, could one day be forced into a situation where they can't enjoy their independence any longer?
I don't see it unless there's a total break off and we're talking about a completely different college football ecosystem, so to speak. I mean, they're in great shape right now. They just signed that new NBC deal. They've got money coming in from the ACC for all their Olympic sports. I mean, from everything I've gathered out of South Bend, they're now making more in TV revenue than SEC schools are, and they're just behind the Big Ten. They are in great financial shape. And as long as they have a carve out in the new playoff, which they do at least for the 12 team system the next 2 years, I mean, they're in great shape. I mean, they're in better shape now than they were before. I know they made the 14 playoff twice, but they had to go undefeated more often than not to get into that final field of 4. We've seen 11-1 Notre Dame teams get left out. In this case, where you just got to be a top 12 team and you look at the talent on that roster, that's a team that should be a playoff team every year. And the more opportunities you get at that championship level, the more likely it is you one day come home with that prize trophy of a national championship. So they're in really, really good shape right now. I don't see anything changing again unless the SEC and Big Ten completely break off and basically cherry pick whoever they want to join their super alliance, super league, whatever you want to call it.
All right. Now that we're in the first year of these like super bloated mega conferences, in the first year of the 12-team playoff, which kind of had to coincide together. Like, I don't know if you could have reasonably had all these teams in these conferences and kept it at 4 and done so with a straight face, right? You couldn't have really done it. How do you think the perception will change and as what's determined as a good season for coaches and teams? Like, if you're expected to go 11-1, but you know, in a normal year, but you go 9-3 because the schedule's tougher, as long as you're in contention for the playoff, should fans be happy with that?
It's going to be interesting, right? I mean, if you're in the SEC and this now 18-team Big Ten and you go 9-3, you're probably going to argue that you're a playoff team over, say, a 10-2 or 11-1 team from a weaker perceived weaker conference. I think it's going to, in many ways, I think it's going to engage the entire nation in the playoff race in late November in a way it probably hasn't, because you usually have a list of teams that are playing for something as far as championship aspirations late in the season. I think it will add a whole new level of intrigue to conference championships, particularly in the Big Ten. Now that it's 1 versus 2 and it's not East-West, which the West never won. Even if that means we get an Ohio State-Michigan rematch. I mean, that's must-see TV. That's a playoff bid on the line. The American Athletic Conference announced today that their championship game is going to be on a Friday night of championship weekend. Well, it's not only going to be in primetime, there's probably going to be a playoff bid online because the highest-ranked group of 5 team is going to automatically qualify for the playoff. And I think more often than not, that will probably be a team from the AAC. So I think we're going to look at things and success and failures differently, right? I mean, you look at a program like Penn State, can't get past Michigan and Ohio State in recent years. However, 10-2 in the Big Ten in each of the last 2 years, you're probably a top 12 team. You're probably in the playoff and you get a chance to make a run at a championship, as unlikely as that is. I look at a team like, say, NC State, which has been right on that like 1B tier of ACC teams the last couple of years. Really good roster, really good coaches. They're putting high round players in the draft every year. They just haven't broken that glass ceiling of playing for an ACC championship. Well, now you do that, you're in the playoff. And can you imagine how much recruiting momentum a program like NC State could get out of saying we were in the playoff? I think it's going to be a lot like March Madness when mid-major schools make March Madness or win their conference tournaments. It's making the dance that is the big celebration. And I think we're going to see that become more commonplace throughout the country.
So we've got a lot of kickoff times getting announced. It's interesting to see the Big Ten logo with CBS. It's strange to see that, but we're going to have to get used to that. We've got the video game coming out. There's a lot of news about that as well. As far as the on-the-field product and some of the stuff to get excited for, I know you've also got some stories. You've been talking to folks. You had Manny Diaz, a Q&A from a couple weeks back, and I ask all this to say, of all that kind of fun stuff that's not legalese or drama, what are you enjoying most right now about the build-up the next season?
This sounds really cheesy, but the kickoff times, as like micro as that is for us in the media, like figuring out what time everything, it just seeing those graphics, seeing College Game Day with the video promoting Texas A&M, Notre Dame week 1, that really gets me excited and reminds me just how close we are to the start of the season, especially with another Ireland game in week 0 with Georgia Tech in Florida State. There's a lot to be excited about right now. I think everyone's excited for the transfer portal to die down a little bit, as much as that can be. But even seeing reporters down at ACC spring meetings from afar, and knowing that the Big Ten's having theirs next week and the SEC will have theirs a couple weeks after that, talking about actual football and about meaningful things as it relates to this coming season is definitely very exciting. A lot more exciting than the tampering accusations we got to deal with in February, or position battles for backup quarterback at spring practice, knowing that whoever loses is going to transfer a week later. The closer we get to the season, the more sunshine I can see from my window right here in beautiful Chicago. That shows me the season's getting closer, and I get really excited about that.
I want to ask you about Dabo Swinney. He had an interview yesterday where he again kind of doubled down on not using the portal, and I just hear Jason Bateman and dodgeball in my head all the time. It's like, pretty interesting strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it works out for him. And he did say this was his quote. And honestly, every player is technically a transfer. We just signed a whole lot of guys that transferred from high school. We like our guys. We like our starters. Look, he's a great coach. He's fantastic. Developmentally, there's not many better than him, of getting guys from high school to being effective true freshmen to all that. Is he missing the boat on, this is not about necessarily getting stars, it's about getting depth that is better if it's a guy who played, say at James Madison and was their starting guard, as opposed to a guy who's a true freshman who can bridge the gap for you, because everyone else is doing it except the service academies and him, and the service academies aren't allowed to.
It's, with some of these quotes, you almost wonder if he's like in on a bit, right? He's trolling us, right? It seems like he comes up with a new way of excusing this, so to speak, every time. And look, no one's made me and everyone in the media and elsewhere look dumber than Dabo Swinney over the years, because what he's done at Clemson, his overall body of work, is second to none among active coaches right now. That said, there's been a dip there the last couple of years, right? They've gone from competing for national championships to simply competing for ACC championships. And I think, that's by no means a broken program. I know the word culture gets thrown around a lot, and it can be very generic and overused. I do believe the Clemson culture, and Dabo believes the Clemson culture is real. And if you've ever been around that program or in that building, it is different, and it's easy to see how these guys have had the kind of success they've had. But they also had that success when they had all, at least from a national title standpoint, when they had generational quarterbacks and Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, and they haven't had that recently. Now, they've recruited to it, at least on paper, with 5 stars like Cade Klubnik and DJ Uyunglele, but that hasn't been there. The receiver talent has not been there. And the difference you're seeing right now, I think, between a Clemson and a program like Georgia that legitimately is competing for a national championship every year, is that you can recruit over your recruit. You can transfer portal your way out of your recruiting mistakes and misses, if that makes sense. If Georgia misses on a position out of high school, they can go get a guy from the portal and they're okay there. Clemson has not taken that approach. And they weren't recruiting at a Georgia, Alabama level to begin with. They were right behind them, and they developed and retained better than everyone, but they were not recruiting as well. So I think those misses out of high school, particularly at quarterback, get magnified, and you're seeing that on the field right now. Again, this is a good program that, even after losing last year at NC State and coming out and upsetting Notre Dame at home, Dabo Swinney comes out there and, again, he throws out a cheesy one-liner about let's buy stock in Clemson now, and we all laughed at it, but they went on a run and they didn't lose a game after that. And again, I think there's something special and unique about that program where people aren't checking out the minute they're disqualified from playing for a national championship, but they need talent and bodies to get back to that level. And the best way to do that, maybe the only way to do it right now, is through the transfer portal. And I think it's maddening right now, if you're a Clemson fan or follower, knowing what this program is capable of and seeing them kind of refuse to dip their toes in that water right now.
Yeah, Tyler from Spartanburg maybe didn't go about it the right way, but eventually, that becomes the overall sentiment, and you get tired of your legendary coach. Things change in a hurry, Matt. Congratulations on the site. Look, we know we work for a company that's independent. There is a freedom in it, right? To where you're driving your own ship. I know there's some terrifying things about it too, but that's what it is when you're the captain of your own ship. So do you feel a little liberated in that?
Oh, certainly. I feel like I'm working more than I ever have before, but I'm also happier than I've ever been before, if that makes sense, because I'm in control, and that's a very special, unique feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got also, like, I saw that you have Bob Kravitz has a page with you guys, like all of that, and signed up. So there's some really cool stuff. I put the link in the chat room, InsideZoneMF.com, which is for Matt Fortuna and not anything else, in case you're
Marcus
wondering.
Freeman.
Yeah, Marcus Freeman. There you go. But Matt, thank you so much for hopping on the show. Good luck, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks. Anytime.
All right. There you go. Matt Fortuna, Inside Zone. And that was right.